Welcome to episode 14 of Let's Rage Together, a podcast where two friends talk about the politics of total liberation and related topics.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 14th episode of Let's Rage Together. I'm Taryn.
And I'm Pete.
And today we're doing something a little bit different. We are doing a new series called Idea Share. So Pete's going to explain a little bit more about that shortly. But if this is the first time you're listening to our podcast and you want to send us any questions or comments or feedback, you can do so at mail@letsragetogether.co.za. You can also contact us on social media on Facebook or Instagram at Let's Rage Together Podcast. And you can also go to letsragetogether.co.za for more information about the podcast. All our episodes are listed there and where you can stream the episodes. And it also has links to our Patreon and PayPal pages where you can make a once-off or recurring donation to help us keep the podcast going if you are willing and able to do so. If not, and you still want to support us, the best way to do that is to give a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen, and to share our posts or share our episodes with anyone you think might be keen to hear.
So this is the 14th episode, but it's the first episode of Idea Share. So in the Idea Share episodes, we aren't going to have any listener feedback, any rads and bads. We're just going to jump straight into the episode. The idea behind Idea Share is that basically we've decided to start a new series of episodes that focus specifically on sharing ideas that either one or both of us have learned or found really interesting or whatever. So we both feel that education should be free for everybody. We think that the world would be a better place if we all shared the knowledge we gain through studies, books, documentaries, etc., etc. Since life is short and we can't do all of the things. So this is our small way of sharing ideas that we think would benefit others in some small way. We had a lot of positive feedback from episode 1, which we did on imposter syndrome, where we also discussed some related concepts that many people seemed to be unfamiliar with, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, for example. So in these episodes, we'll be sharing similar concepts relating to psychology, philosophy, or anything really that we find interesting, because Taryn and I have a very broad range of interests. It may be a book or documentary one of us has learned something from, not necessarily like an in-depth review or something, but more kind of the sharing of ideas that we thought were important or something that we gained. So for this first Idea Share episode, Taryn is going to talk about logical fallacies and cognitive biases. But in terms of total liberation, whether we are talking about liberating ourselves or fighting for social justice, we all need to be able to think clearly and logically, and we need to be able to engage and have rational debates without falling into damaging thinking traps. Not only damaging for ourselves because you feel stuck, but it can damage whatever movement you're part of. It can create biases against the idea that you're trying to talk to people about. So Taryn has chosen some of these things that come up pretty commonly, so hopefully they won't be too obvious for you and you'll get something out of the discussion. So yeah, here we go.
So as Pete said, I thought it would be helpful to start off the idea shares with sharing ideas about thinking and logic, because logic is important. So I've just chosen a couple of cognitive errors and kind of logical fallacies that I see happening online and in debates pretty often that are very frustrating. So hopefully this will be a quick overview of the kinds of thinking errors that we all make sometimes, and will help us all to be a little bit more aware of those things when we're engaging in discussions. So firstly, just to kind of summarize what a cognitive bias is, it's basically just a systematic error in the way that we think. And that affects the decisions we make, the judgments we make, and the ways that we reason through things. So when we're engaging in a debate about any topic, we obviously need to use logic. And when our logic fails, these errors occur.
So my first impression is that cognitive is like brain thinking.
Yes, cognitive relates to thought process.
And bias obviously is your own sway towards whatever you imagine things to be like, even if they aren't like that.
Yeah, and then a logical fallacy would be a mistake in your logical process. So you think what you're saying is A leads to B, therefore C, but you're making an error along the way, basically in the way that you're reasoning. So these aren't in any kind of order of preference or importance or prevalence or anything like that. It was just a few that I came across that I thought were important. So the first one that I thought would be important is the sunk cost fallacy. So this is basically when you cling to an idea or cling to something because of the perceived investment you've already put in. That can be an emotional investment, a monetary investment, a time investment. So for example, if you start a project and it's failing dismally and you're unhappy and you're not enjoying it, but you just hold on to it because you've invested into it, or you've put in months of your life, or a lot of like your emotional capacity has gone into it, you're much more likely to try and keep it going. The same can be said for like friendships or relationships that are toxic or unhealthy, and we can kind of get stuck there because we perceive this investment to be so big that we just push on. I guess it might almost be like a sense of embarrassment, like, oh, I've put so much into this, I better stick with it, you know. And I think it also comes down to social conditioning, where, you know, you grow up and you get told, well, you've started this, you better finish it. And no, life's short. It's like you can start something and just stop.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it immediately makes me think about books, because everyone seems to be kind of torn on that, you know.
I'm
like,
the worst with books.
Like, I've started this book, so I have to finish it. And I'm like, no, any book that doesn't like completely grab you and light something in you, you should just drop, honestly, because I feel for me, like, life is way too short and there are way too many books to read to like give your time to some book that doesn't grab you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you brought this up, because I'm the worst in this case with books. And the frustrating thing about a lot of these fallacies and like cognitive biases is, like, on the one hand, logically, you can reason through and realize like this is a mistake. So we're having this discussion now, and logically, I know what you just said makes so much sense. Like, life is short, we're going to die. Don't read shitty books. But I'm so bad at like starting a book and being incapable of not finishing it because I just think, what if it gets better? Like, what? And that's such a logical fallacy as well.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there's something good at the end. Maybe I'm going to miss out on an idea. And then it's like this, oh, well, I've already spent 3 hours reading this thing. I better finish it, because otherwise it's like a real waste of time. So,
I mean, I sometimes get like halfway through and drop a book.
yeah.
Because I'm just like, life is too short for these books, you know. And I think Goodreads has ruined it for some people, because, you know, the Goodreads reading challenge. And then people are like, oh, I just have to finish so that I can get my 12 books or 54 books or however many ridiculous number of books people want to read.
I feel so personally attacked right now.
So, at least I understood your concept, right?
Yes, you did. And you grounded me pretty hard.
But I think it happens really often. And it's also kind of sad. I heard it recently on a podcast. I would say what it was if I could remember, but I can't. Where there was a woman who spoke about starting an NGO that basically helped these women that made these like really beautiful basket things. And there was this European dude that had come around and visited this country.
I think it might have been it was that failure is an option or something, the TED Radio Hour.
Yeah, so there was this guy who worked out that he could basically exploit these indigenous women and buy their baskets for like really cheap and resell them in his country, and they were like explosively popular. So then she decided to do the same thing but pay them like a fair price, and thought that this like business would explode, and they stopped selling to him and started selling to her, and her business didn't go well. But because she had bought into the idea and put so much time and money in, she thought that this is going to be an incredible business thing for me, and I'm going to make these women have like a livelihood and everything. And she should have dropped out much earlier, but didn't. And then eventually had to go to the woman and be like, I don't have any money for you, and this business model isn't working.
And I think guilt plays a big role there as well, because it's like, oh, I'm going to let myself down. And in this case, or I'm going to let these women down, they're depending on me, or oh, I'm going to let my family down, or I'm going to let whoever down. And I think just in terms of also from another angle, when you're talking about like activism and like, say, vegan education or whatever, I think this is an important one to keep in mind when you advocating for someone whose livelihood depends on like the animal agriculture industry, is that if you're trying to say to a farmer, oh, you can switch your farm to plant-based farming instead of like raising animals for food, it makes sense that they would think, well, I've invested all this time and energy and like my whole life has centered around this. So it makes sense that they would want to hold on to that, even if everything around them is saying, you kind of
Yeah.
have to switch now.
And maybe there's a sentimental attachment because their father and grandfather and great-grandfather did the same farming. So
Yeah.
switching would kind of be like admitting that they were wrong or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've put in all that emotional investment as well. It's like part of the identity.
And I think it also happens in terms of direct action. I've heard that people who do direct action that could get them in legal trouble will plan things for a really long time, like 6 months planning, a year planning for some kind of action. And then it would be easy for when that is happening to be like, cool, it's like foolproof. We're definitely just going to stick this out. But what should happen is that if even one thing goes wrong, and it could happen that someone's going to get arrested or in trouble or something, you scratch it and like go back to the drawing board and plan again.
Which is hard to do when you've invested a lot of time and energy. And
Yeah.
And you might be tempted to just be like, oh, let's just do it. And then that's where you get caught.
Exactly. And then people's lives can get wrecked. So
Yeah.
sunk cost fallacy. Very
Yeah.
interesting, Taryn.
Okay, so the next one that's pretty common is the confirmation bias. So this is basically where you look for evidence to support your beliefs. And this is really common in vegan activism from both sides. So the activist and the non-vegan looking for information to confirm your beliefs. So if you believe that a plant-based diet is going to cure everything, you will find every bit of scientific and anecdotal evidence to prove that. And this is why we kind of caution against oversharing facts or overpromising facts about veganism, because it's quite easy, because you want these things to be true, to look for evidence to support that. In the same regard, when you're talking to like a non-vegan, they are much more likely to look for any kind of evidence that veganism is unhealthy, plant-based diet is unhealthy or whatever, and they will only pay attention to the evidence that supports what they already think.
I think it can be applied to a lot of things, right? I
Yeah.
think it can be super damaging in relationships. If you like, I don't believe what this person feels about me. If I message them and they respond and they like say they were just busy or in a rush or something, and then they respond and it's not really like reciprocal of what you said, or they'd be like, oh, I fucking knew it. They're not even into me.
Yeah, or like, oh, my boss hates me at work. So
Yeah.
then you walk in and you say morning, and they're just like morning. And you think, oh, you see.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe they're just having a bad day. So just if you're looking for evidence to support something, look for contrary evidence as well if you really want to get to the bottom of it.
Realize that your mind can be your own enemy.
Yeah. Then the next one, which is really important in activism, is the backfire effect. So this is basically the tendency to hold more strongly to your beliefs when they are challenged. So I've seen this often, again, with animal rights activism, where you provide a whole lot of evidence to the contrary, and instead of paying attention, I think it obviously ties into a confirmation bias as well, where you believe what you believe so much stronger because there's evidence to the contrary. So it almost makes you defensive. So then you're likely to engage in a multitude of other fallacies to justify what you believe.
Because this just makes me think about religious people. Every time you challenge someone who's like fundamentalist or whatever, then they just feel like more strongly. Do you think that this can lead to the persecution complex? Like, I'm being persecuted. So say someone like challenges you. You could take that as like, I'm being persecuted. I've been told by my religious leaders that blessed are the persecuted or something. So like, because I'm being persecuted, that reaffirms that I'm right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's why I say it could be linked to probably a range of different fallacies that you'll employ to justify your faulty beliefs, kind of thing. And this one is super frustrating as well, because especially when you're trying to advocate for like a social justice issue and the person you're speaking to just does not want to hear what you're saying, and just the very presence of an opposing argument makes them cling more strongly to their belief. Like you get the people who will say, oh, well, I don't care if you're vegan, I'm going to eat twice the amount of animal products just to make up for it, and they like get more staunch in their beliefs just because they're annoyed by the challenge that's being presented.
So because you eat no animal products, does that mean they're going to eat twice the amount of animals on Earth?
You use this joke so often and it never gets funnier. Like it just doesn't.
Okay.
They don't say, oh, well, you're not eating animals, so I'm going to eat double the amount.
You just said that.
But they're not saying I'm going to eat double the amount you eating. They're saying I'm going to eat double the amount I'm already eating.
Okay, well, if they did say that.
So basically, you have just engaged in a logical fallacy to try and make a joke, and you have failed hard.
Okay, Taryn's going to be the only one talking for the rest of this episode.
Okay, the next one is the blind spot bias. And you kind of alluded to this earlier. This is basically what you just did, failing to recognize your own cognitive.
I'm going to just keep rubbing it in the whole rest of the episode.
So it's failing to recognize your own cognitive biases. So you didn't realize that you had a logical fallacy there. And even though I've never laughed at that joke, you keep repeating it because you don't see that there's an error in your logic.
Maybe they think that. Maybe they say, I'm going to eat twice the amount of animals you don't eat.
Yeah, that seems legit, Pete.
Well, some people are really stupid.
Okay. Anyway, we all have biases. So the next one that I came across is conservatism bias. And this is basically the tendency to hold on to your prior ideas or knowledge despite new evidence.
Oh, like religious people.
But it's similar to confirmation bias, I guess, or any of these, I guess, or the backfire effect. Basically, if you think about the whole protein myth, like you need animal flesh to get enough protein. And then there are loads of new studies that come out that say, no, you don't. Then you're like, but I remember when I was in school and I learned the food pyramid, my grade 2 teacher said. And you will hold on to that, even though that was however many years ago. There is new evidence, it's updated, science is better, and you're still like, no. My gran told me I need milk for calcium in my bones.
Yeah, I watched such a frustrating debate between a man I don't like called Ken Ham, who has like this Christian fundamentalist, like in quotes, science organization called Answers in Genesis, where he thinks all the answers to every question can be found in the book of Genesis in the Bible, debating Bill Nye, the science guy. And it is infuriating.
Can I just ask a rhetorical question to the listeners? Is anyone not singing Bill Nye, the science guy? Continue.
Love you, Bill. But he was actually like pretty brave because he went to do the talk at a theological university. You can find it on YouTube. It's like a 3-hour long debate of this creationist versus Bill Nye the science guy. And I think they were talking about...
You can just call him Bill Nye.
I have to call him Bill Nye the science guy. That's his full name. He probably says that on his birth certificate. But it's just a really infuriating debate. And actually it's funny because like a fundamentalist Christian told me to watch it because he thought that Ken Ham smashed Bill Nye, but it's actually the other way around. And the infuriating thing is that conservatism bias in that is wild because right at the end, they kind of get stuck, and you can see that Bill Nye the science guy is getting like super annoyed because he can't get anywhere with this guy, and this guy can't get anywhere, so he starts insulting him on stupid stuff like the color of his tie or whatever. And then they ask them, both of them, if anything could change your mind from your current position that you have, what would it be? And Bill Nye, the science guy, says evidence, and Ken Ham says nothing. So then I'm thinking, like, what was the point of your debate then? Because all you were trying to do is like convert someone else to your opinion.
Yeah, but it's interesting because in that situation, he's probably not intentionally being illogical. You know, that's the thing with a lot of these cognitive errors is that we think we are all being perfectly logical. And that's why it's so frustrating when you're trying to challenge people's ideas because they will not get it because they just cannot, and they can't see that they're making errors. Just like you can't see that your meat joke, double the meat joke is illogical. So
it is illogical if they say it like I said it.
Yeah, but nobody means that. Let's be honest, Pete. So yeah, that's frustrating because most of us have the blind spot bias. We don't know our own biases exist. So it's frustrating.
So then if you have conservatism bias, then you don't even realize if you have blind spot bias too.
Well, blind spot bias is basically having a blind spot about any of your own biases. So like the person who says, I'm not racist, but you're like...
But it's not necessarily holding on. Like the conservatism one seems to me more like, even if you don't have a blind spot and you know that the other person is speaking sense and you're like, no, I refuse to move to budge my opinion. Isn't that a conservatism bias versus more the blind spot bias is like you just don't know. You just don't know what you don't know.
But I mean, nobody wants to be illogical. So I think there is a sense of stubbornness that comes with defending certain views, especially when there's like an emotive element like religion or ethics of like eating animal products or whatever, those kind of very emotive, ethically based arguments, there's so much personal investment in those ideas. So I think there's the potential to just be aggressive and stubborn and like, I don't care what you're saying, I'm not going to listen to you. But even that, I don't think there's much awareness because nobody wants to be illogical.
I think some people don't want to be, but they feel like a duty to be because of things like a faith or something that they know is illogical.
Yeah, but then they'll justify it with more cognitive biases saying, you know, we must have faith or we must this. And they're just drawing on other fallacies to justify their fallacies. So my assumption is that, and this could be a cognitive error on my part, but my assumption is that it's hardly ever intentional. I think we all make logical errors to different degrees, depending how self-aware we are. Okay, the next one is really common and problematic, but often also misunderstood, is stereotyping.
No, that's a massive one.
So most people obviously understand what a stereotype is and understand the concept of stereotyping. But what a lot of people don't really realize is that there is a positive side of stereotyping. So in like our cognitive psychology, we have to use stereotypes. For example, even like the models of dogs that you have in your mind, that is essentially based off of a stereotype. So you have a stereotype idea of a dog, like a mental framework in your mind of what a dog looks like: snout, four paws, all of that stuff. And that mental model helps you to generalize that information to identify other dogs that you haven't seen before. So in that sense, it's a kind of stereotype. We also use it as a kind of evolutionary defense to protect ourselves from danger or identifying friend versus enemy. So there's a lot of like in-group, out-group stuff that comes into play, but there is benefit to having stereotypes in terms of understanding each other. So as much as we might hate to admit it, we all kind of conform to a lot of personal stereotypes in the way that we dress, the way that we speak, the way that we identify ourselves, and that we might want to resist some of those things because we like to think that we're individuals, but it also helps us to identify in certain ways to kind of project a message into the world that says, I am this person, you know. So you can generally see, like I can see by looking at you, that as a stereotype in my mind, I don't see you like a frequent club going gym butt.
Yeah.
Because I can just see that when I look at you. You're not like that.
I don't find that stereotype offensive.
So that's helpful, but it could still be wrong. You could be like all about the raves and drugs.
Yeah, it's all about the lax and cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. You could be like that. But in that case, a stereotype is helpful because we can kind of identify the sort of people that we'll get along with or won't, or by stereotyping like facial expressions and stuff, we can kind of gauge whether someone is a threat or not. So it does have benefits, but obviously we make huge errors, and then that leads over into prejudice and racism and all those kinds of things. So it's just something to be aware of, that even if you are mostly right about someone's stereotype, they are still individuals, and that doesn't mean that you can just assume you know them in entirety.
It becomes really hard with political leanings, because generally, like, you know, if you met someone, say someone was like a Trump supporter, most people probably are going to stereotype like, okay, but they might also be Christian, they're probably white, they're probably against abortion, they're probably anti-immigrant, and there's like a lot of stuff in like a package that will come with it, you know. So yeah, I mean, that's difficult. And then obviously, like you said, it can lead to racism, like prejudice and racism. Even, I know it's not the same thing you were saying, like the stereotyping that can be positive, but you know, there's positive stereotyping. So saying that race is really good at running, or like that race is super good at dancing or whatever, which is still a harmful stereotype to have.
Yeah, I agree. We just have to be mindful of the fact that it's only helpful as far as it keeps us out of danger in like a momentary quick judgment, like get out of a dangerous situation or whatever, or to kind of identify people we might be able to relate to. You know, it just helps us to function socially. But I think if you're making like sweeping claims about someone based on a stereotype, then you're in like super dangerous territory.
Especially if it's about what they think or how they or how they live or whatever. So
yeah. The next one is the bandwagon effect. And this is basically the tendency to believe something because many people do.
So everyone actually has this bias.
Totally. Like if you think some kind of fashion item is nice, chances are it's because it's been marketed that way for the most part.
But what about the flat earth though? I'm joking. It's ridiculous.
Well, if you're in an echo chamber where there are a lot of flat earthers, you might just jump on the bandwagon.
Oh yeah, it's true.
So also like we need meat to be strong. Bandwagon effect.
Yeah. But it's very much like a group influence.
Yeah. And something I read online, which was quite interesting that I've never thought of, is this particular fallacy is a large reason why meetings are often unproductive. Because you kind of all start to think the same thing in a setting where you are sharing ideas and you kind of start to agree with each other. And then there's no progress, there's no new ideas because you're just sitting there like reinforcing the same thing. So
it's interesting that this term isn't used more, because you do often hear people speak about, I don't know, everyone being sheep, or like people buying into these ideas just because someone's a celebrity or a leader or something. But I don't often hear about the bandwagon effect.
Well, you hear people say, oh, you're just jumping on the bandwagon, but they don't realize that all of us probably are.
I only hear like older people say things like that, jumping on the bandwagon.
What are you trying to say, Pete?
Sorry, it's pretty ageist of me.
Yeah, exactly. The next one is an illusory correlation. So this is basically seeing a cause-effect relationship where there is just a correlation and it might be completely unrelated. It's obviously really important in scientific research and stuff like that, but it happens in day-to-day as well. That's why there was such a huge debate, and it continues, about vaccines being linked to autism. It's been widely debunked, but there's still this assumption that because there was some loose correlation that was found, that suddenly it implies causation. That's not necessarily the case. You can have two things co-occurring for a completely different reason. So I think here it's important to be aware of like confounding variables. As a really basic example, things like lucky charms. So you have a professional sports person who has a specific item of clothing or a lucky charm, and they wear that item or have that item in their possession and then do really well, and then they assume that this lucky charm has an influence on how they play, so they use it every time, and every time they play well, but then they are ignoring the fact that they have a really good training regime outside of that or whatever that's actually helping them, or maybe they're in a good mental health space or whatever. So it's just basically a faulty correlation, or a correlation being assumed to be causative.
Okay. Do you think it can get pretty like heavy psychologically, in the sense that it can start to affect you physically even? Like if you think like, if I don't have this teddy bear, I can't sleep. Or like as someone who like has asthma, sometimes I'll get asthma if I don't have my asthma pump with me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's like with panic disorder, if you have a panic attack, so you can have a situation where your panic attack generalizes to similar situations, or when you feel those physiological effects. So like say you have a panic attack in a very stressful environment and your heart rate is increasing, and obviously when you have a panic attack, those things are happening, you're sweating, all of those things are happening, and you get into that state of panic. Then completely unrelated, you go to gym and you're on the treadmill and your heart rate increases, and that physiological feeling has a psychological trigger for you. So you then relate that increase in heart rate, the sweating, all of that to, oh shit, I'm having a panic attack, and then you actually have one. So it generalizes. Wow. Then the gym can become a trigger where you think, okay, if I go to the gym, I'm going to have a panic attack. But it had nothing to do with the gym. It had to do with the physiological response inside your body. So things like that can definitely happen. And, you know, a lot of those anxiety kind of symptoms can definitely have physical manifestations if you start to believe that there's a causation there.
Okay. It's really interesting.
But I think it does become like problematic in terms of politics, social justice and stuff, where you have like, say, conservative people assuming that bad things are happening in a town because the demographics have become more diverse.
Or you've let immigrants into your country, and because of your own shitty corruption or something, maybe crime levels have increased or something, and then you blame like the immigrants coming in for
Yeah.
the rise in crime or something.
Exactly. Meantime, there's a range of other factors causing those things. So the next one that I wanted to mention is polarized or black and white thinking. So this is important in any kind of debate or argument where you'll have someone who thinks in terms of black and white only. It can either be this or that, no in between, no nuance, no complexity. I think it's pretty obvious why that's a problem. You know, there are very few topics that are not nuanced or have some kind of complexity. You know?
Or people. You know.
Yeah.
I'm reading a really great book at the moment called Why Good People Do Bad Things by James Hollis. And that talks all about that, you know, like realizing that to be your whole self is to embrace the gray and the nuance of yourself. And you shouldn't just live in this, like, I know what's right and wrong. This is who I am. Can make you really kind of dangerous and judgmental if you aren't willing to acknowledge the gray areas and nuances of life.
Yeah, and it can have really negative effects on you and on other people. So even if, for example, you're a student and you fail an exam that was really important, it could be quite easy in reacting to that failure to label your whole person as a failure and think, I'm useless, I'm a failure, I'm stupid, I'm all of these things. And that is very black and white thinking. You know, failing one thing does not make you a failure. It just means that something went wrong in that instance.
Yeah. I mean, black and white thinking is also why I think a lot of people like become racist and hate the unknown, because it's easier when life is black and white, you know. There's male, female. There's no other genders. Women are into men and the other way around. There's no other kind of attraction. Like that kind of black and white thinking is easier. So then people react really badly when life becomes more nuanced. And then there's actually like a bunch of genders and a bunch of like sexual preferences and a bunch of races or nationalities or whatever. So it can be like really harmful in that sense, because maybe this also ties to the conservatism bias as well, you know, because you have black and white thinking about life, which just makes it's going to make your life and everyone else's harder.
Yeah, and add that to some stereotyping and you have like a world of shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Then the next one, a lot of these kind of overlap a lot. This can be quite similar to black and white thinking, but overgeneralization. So where you take one behavior of a person or one aspect of their personality or one single event and generalize it to everything else. So similar to the exam example, I failed this exam, therefore I'm stupid. So you generalize and assume that you're going to fail all exams going forward. Or say you witness someone get into a fight, so you assume that they are an aggressive, horrible person, but you don't have the context. You don't know that maybe it was self-defense in that situation. So an overgeneralization would be, oh, Pete is a violent, aggressive person. I saw him hit someone once. But you don't know the context. So
okay, it makes me think about people who aren't vegan. I mean, who say like, oh, I hate vegan food.
Yes.
Because maybe they went to some restaurant and someone served them plain tofu.
Yeah, and now they're like,
once
oh, I
they're
hate
like,
all
I hate
vegan food.
And I'm always like, oh, you don't like apples or bread or pasta. I think we all do that though, to a degree. I mean, even in small things, like you've tried one thing, it was horrible. You've tried one thing, it was really good. So you just stick with those things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we quite commonly will be averse to something that we have a bad experience at first.
Yeah.
Which I think is even another fallacy. I think it might be part of like anchoring or something, but I'm not going to speak about that now. But like that one trail run that we did, I had like the worst trail run of my life. I hated it. I was like tired. I was grumpy. I was not in a good mental space. I fell so freaking hard. I was like covered from head to toe in sand. I smashed my knees. I had like a sore shoulder. If that was the first trail run I ever did, I don't think I would have ever wanted to do another one ever again, because it was a horrible experience.
Yeah.
And I think that happens pretty often. You know, you'll try something or you'll meet someone or you'll, you know, have some kind of experience. And if it's bad, you will just assume that it is bad.
But it's actually like, it kind of comes back to like polarized thinking and not realizing, not keeping things like specific to the one event. So like that trail run, it was a particularly exceptionally hard course.
Yeah.
And maybe you were having a shit day as well.
Yeah, it was.
So it would have been a bummer, because there are others that are like much easier and much more pleasant, and you're going to have much better days. And
Yeah, and if I'm not being a grumpy shithead from the start, then I'll probably have a better run.
yeah.
The next one is emotional reasoning. And this is something I think we all fall into the trap of, especially when we're having like ethical debates and discussions or speaking about something that we're really passionate about. And it can also happen a lot in things like depression and anxiety, that if I'm feeling this thing, it must be true. So I feel like this person hates me, therefore they hate me. Or I feel like you are being aggressive towards me, therefore you are being aggressive towards me. Meantime, our own personal filters and perceptions and stuff can be pretty skewed, obviously. So that's really dangerous.
I'm so bad at emotional reasoning, really. And it's so hard as well when you're in it, though, to realize what is real and not. Do you know what I mean? Your emotional reasoning, like, and a lot of these biases, how do you know if you are having them? That's what I think the dilemma is. Like, how do I know right now I'm experiencing conservatism? What?
Yeah.
Conservatism. Conservatism bias, or I'm just right. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's like the similar kind of conversation we had when we spoke about imposter syndrome. And if you haven't listened to episode 1, we discussed it in depth there. But how do you know if you are being an imposter in a situation and you don't belong there, or if it is imposter syndrome and you're fine? Like, it's really hard to know, is this a bias that I'm having right now?
Yeah.
Or am I really perceiving the world as it is? I think the key is to realize that none of us are ever perceiving the world as it is. We all filter our experiences through our emotions, our past experiences, our level of intelligence, our ways of processing, our ways of understanding, all of that. So my world is never going to be the same as your world. So I think we should err on the side of caution and assume that we are being biased. And
all
I think
the time.
We probably all are always having some level of bias. Either we are having a little bit of emotional reasoning, or a little bit of stereotyping, or a little bit of black and white thinking, or overgeneralization. Maybe we are being solidly logical, but I think the best way to identify these things and to counter them is to look for competing evidence. So if you think of a basic scientific approach, you test a hypothesis, and the way you do that is you look for evidence to the contrary, and you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that this thing is true. So if you are feeling especially something negative about someone else, or if you're feeling negative about yourself, or something is causing you distress, or if you're having an intense debate or argument with someone, that should be a key that, okay, there's another perspective here. You wouldn't be debating with someone if you were being solidly and they're logical and they're being logical. It means that they see things differently. So I would suggest that in those situations, you think, okay, this person is disagreeing. One of us is being illogical, or both. So look at it from their perspective. Look at all of these areas that we're talking about today. And I think that's why this kind of conversation is important, to remind ourselves we could be making any one of these errors at any time. So let's think about them. Could I be overgeneralizing right now? Could I be emotionally reasoning? If you are reasoning about something and you are also angry, you are reasoning through your anger.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I find it really hard with emotional reasoning, though, because then I'm like, okay, I'm reasoning this thing emotionally, but I'm not aware of it. But to test if I am, I build up like facts. I build up like a list
with confirmation bias.
Yeah, so then I'm like, hey, well, then I can't be having emotional reasoning because I have these 10 reasons that back up why I feel this way.
But then you need to realize there's a chance that you're engaging in confirmation bias, because when you're using emotional reasoning, you want to prove yourself right.
Yeah.
So you will look for evidence to support that. So I think the key is not just looking for facts, looking for opposing facts. So if you think, oh, I'm a total failure, what evidence do you have? Not for that, but to the contrary. If you think, oh, my boss hates me, or this person doesn't like me, what evidence do you have to the contrary? Because it's very easy to find supporting evidence, because we all have confirmation bias when we want to. We can all reason emotionally. So I think the best is stop. Firstly, what would a friend say? How would a friend reason this? And what evidence is there to the contrary?
And do you think it's helpful as well? I really love listening to Duff the Sykes podcast, the hardcore self-help podcast, right?
Yeah.
So highly recommended. But in his book, It's called Fuck Depression.
Yeah, and there's Fuck Anxiety.
And Fuck Anxiety. They're both amazing books. Should read them.
And they're short as well.
Yeah, they're short. And the Fuck Depression one specifically really helped me. But one of his big things is journaling, like working through stuff, writing, which really, really helps me a lot. And when you are experiencing like something that you're very anxious about, or I guess if you're having emotional reasoning and you're doubting yourself, one of his tactics, I guess, or tools you can use is to draw like 3 columns. Write down the thing that's stressing you out or that you're thinking about in the far left column. In the next column, you write your immediate thought. So like, this happened obviously because of this. Then in the third column, you have to write reasonable response. So you have to write down alternatives to your immediate thought. And it always helps me relax because often there's like 4 or 5 alternatives to the one I immediately thought of. And then I guess it helps you kind of like get out of your head.
Yeah, it helps to get a bit of perspective like that. And I think if you're even struggling to do that, that's where I would recommend saying, what would my best friend say to me? Because if you can't think of a reasonable response, chances are you can think of someone in your life that would give you some pretty solid counter arguments immediately. Or, ask yourself, if my best friend was bringing this problem to me, what would my response be to them? Because we can be a lot kinder to our friends than to ourselves a lot of the time. So if your immediate response is, oh, Pete, you're a total failure, but then you imagine me coming to you with that problem and saying,
Pete, you are a total failure.
No. If you imagine me bringing the same problem, would you tell me I'm a total failure?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm joking. I get what you're saying. And then I guess the other thing you can do is actually ask a friend.
Yeah, and moral of the story, don't ever ask Pete.
But I'm saying like, you're saying think about what your friend would say.
Yeah.
So do that, maybe like write down some stuff, whatever. If you're still struggling,
ask someone. Yeah.
Actually, because we're not in a vacuum. We don't live on an island. Like you could, if you have someone you trust who you think isn't going to judge what you're dealing with, then like give them a call or ask to meet up and say like, this is what happened, this is what I think, and then they can say, oh, you're being a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Or no, like you're wrong. Like, or
you're reasoning emotionally right now, take a breath.
And hopefully like not exactly, you are exactly right, your thinking is correct.
Yeah, in which case you should get better friends. But we've gone a little bit off topic now, but in a good way. I think it's good to talk through these things, but we just have a few more examples to go through. So the next one that I think is really, really important is the halo effect. So this is basically judging someone based on one aspect of their identity or their character or whatever it is. So I think you see it pretty often with like academics or authority figures or whatever, where say you have a medical doctor, everybody thinks, okay, doctor, smart person, knows things, I will believe what they say. But then you have a medical doctor talking about economics. They're not likely to be experts in both fields, but a lot of people will say, oh, Dr. So-and-so says this though. And it gives them this sort of like halo, this like put them on a pedestal, they know stuff, so I must believe what they say, and they're speaking about a field that's completely irrelevant to them, but you believe them because it's Dr. So-and-so. And the same could be said for like characteristics. So if you think someone is a good person because you saw them do a good deed, you think, oh, Pete's such a nice person, therefore I'm going to believe what he's saying right now. He could be lying like easily, but I believe because I saw this one time he was nice to someone. So you almost making like a false equivalency where you're saying this person did this good thing, or this person is an expert in this thing, so then I'm going to generalize that quality to everything they do. And it can happen with attractiveness as well. So attractive people are more likely to be viewed as like calm or intelligent or whatever, but that could be completely wrong.
Yeah, people have a bias towards them.
Yeah.
Or say like often happens like men who play in bands get accused of like sexual assault charges or something, but because everybody loves that band and loves that person's playing, and even their friends who are in the band with them will be like, no way, they're an amazing person, I've grown up with them,
and their band has good lyrics, so it can't be.
I've met them like lots of times after shows and hung out, and they're really great people. Like, no ways that guy would do that or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when you really don't know anything about them.
The next one we have, it's kind of related to a lot of the others as well, is self-serving bias. So self-serving bias is basically attributing positive things in your life to yourself and negative things in your life to other people. So basically narcissists, arrogant people, you know, if something bad happens to them, it's like, oh, the world is against me. You did this, you to blame for this. But if they achieve something, it's like, all right, I'm so great. I worked my way up from the bottom. I like put in the hard hours. I did this. So it's basically attributing all positive things to yourself and your own efforts and negative things to others, you know, disregarding the help that you got along the way for your successes and whatever.
So this one just basically sucks. There's no positive like side to it.
Yeah. Just get over yourself.
Yeah, honestly.
But it's important to pick up in other people. Like
Yeah.
if you're debating something, you know, especially the whole, you know, if you're having a discussion about white privilege, I worked my way up from the top. We weren't rich. We did this. Like my parents just taught me good values.
I
And
didn't
it's like,
have white privilege.
yeah, it's like, whatever, bro. Look at like everything you were given.
Yeah.
So
Look at the language and the accent you were born into.
yeah. And like, yeah, you worked really hard after your parents paid for your tertiary
Yeah.
education and everything. Yeah. And if something negative happens, like, yeah, I only failed that one exam, but it was just set way too hard.
Yeah,
The
that
lecturers were
question was
idiots.
terrible.
The
Yeah.
lecturers didn't know what they were doing. I mean,
Okay,
anyway.
worst people.
But I think we can probably all do it sometimes.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
The next one is in-group bias. Now, this is an interesting one as well, because I think it can also relate to things like racism and negative stereotypes and prejudice and all of that stuff. So it's basically a favor towards or being more likely to trust people that are similar to yourself, like similar racial, cultural, whatever backgrounds, family backgrounds. So anyone that you can identify as being similar or someone in your kind of inner circle, you're more likely to trust them and you're more likely to be able to relate to them. You're more likely to see them favorably. And it seems pretty negative because it can result in a lot of like prejudice and things like that. But it's also kind of useful when you're thinking of like activism and advocacy and stuff like that. And Bearded Vegans actually spoke about this on one of their episodes, where it makes more sense to advocate for people who are in some way like you. That's not to say you shouldn't advocate for people who are from different like class or racial or whatever backgrounds, but that say like we are into the hardcore scene. It'll be easier for us to advocate veganism to other people in the hardcore scene because we have common ground.
Or for someone involved in similar things to advocate stuff for us.
What do you mean?
To us, do you know what I mean? So I'm thinking about like, say for example, if I had to speak to a guy like my dad about veganism, most likely they're not going to listen to this like
Tattooed young
yeah.
radical man.
but if you have like someone, say like Gary Player, who's vegan, I think he's vegan,
I don't know.
but you know, some famous sports person.
He's a soccer player, right? Kidding. I know he plays golf.
You know, if you have someone who's like they're like an amazing sports person, speak to them, they'll like listen, even if we say the exact same things.
Yeah, and that's
use the same
I guess why marketing companies love like sports celebrities, because like every aspiring soccer player kid is gonna buy the shoes that you wear.
And influencers.
Yeah.
I hate that shit so much.
Yeah, same. But this is why it happens, because someone you either can relate to or aspire to relate to is more likely to influence you. So it's just something to bear in mind if you are like a really liberal atheist, I don't know what, trying to go into some conservative community, into a church and talk about an issue. Probably not going to be super well received.
But at the same time, this can be used against people in a good way.
What do you mean?
So like white people should call out other white people for their racist bullshit.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and you're using that person's own bias towards you because you are the same skin color as them.
Yes.
Against
To
them.
actually take you seriously
Yeah.
and listen to you.
And
yeah.
that's why it should actually be like white people's responsibility and emotional labor to call out other white people on their racism
Yes.
instead of leaving it.
And
So-
dudes calling out dudes for sexism.
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
then you are using someone's in-group bias like to your advantage to call them out.
Yeah. Never mind the fact that you're also saving the emotional labor from the oppressed people. But
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point. But also I think it's something good for preventing burnout in activists as well. Like so many people are distraught because they can't get their family to go vegan.
It's the hardest
And
thing.
like if you can't relate to your family on anything except the fact that you are related, just leave it.
Yeah.
Like, there are so many people who are already receptive to veganism and to other issues of social justice that are open to listening and that you can probably relate to on a whole range of levels. Start with those people. Once all of them are vegan, then maybe start with another group. But, don't panic if you like hitting a brick wall trying to advocate to someone you can't relate to at all. Just leave them alone. Let somebody else do it. There are enough people to talk to get through to.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is a straw man fallacy or straw man argument. So this is basically when someone misrepresents an argument to make it easier to attack. So they will criticize the argument that you make, but in that criticism, they are twisting what you're saying and changing the meaning of it so that it's easy to attack.
So annoying. This is the most annoying.
Happens so often. Like, oh, well, vegans just hate people, so I don't care about your message. And it's like, when did I say that?
Feminists hate men, so I'm not going to be...
Yeah, exactly. Bunch of man haters.
Yeah. This is the stupidest thing. It's so frustrating to me when someone misrepresents my argument.
Yeah, super frustrating.
Yeah, it's so frustrating.
So, for example, something to be aware of in not doing this, say you are doing vegan activism and you want to appeal to someone's environmental concerns or something like that. The worst thing you can possibly do is, okay, so you eat animal products, so you obviously hate the environment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's obviously an extreme kind of example, but that's the kind of process that happens. Like, oh, you said this, so obviously you think this, and that's reprehensible, So it's like when people say, when you're trying to advocate for freedom of sexual expression and sexual orientation, and you say, I think people can be attracted to a range of different identities and genders and things like that, and that's okay, whoever you're attracted to is fine. Then you have someone saying, oh, well, you're obviously fine with like child molestation and pedophilia.
Yeah.
And you're
when you're like, well, I didn't actually say anything.
I didn't say anything like that.
About individuals who can't consent.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
But that's the kind of logic that occurs where it's
Yeah.
like twisted to like, oh, well, you're obviously fine with this thing.
Yeah, okay. So strawman arguments, stay away from them.
Yeah. The next one is fundamental attribution error. This one is pretty similar to the self-serving bias where you favor your own achievements and blame others for your failures. So the fundamental attribution error is basically when you make a mistake and you attribute it to your context. So you take into account all the gray areas and the nuance and all of that. And you say, oh, well, I was angry that day or whatever, so I made a mistake. But when it comes to someone else, you attack their character and say, you made this mistake, therefore you're a horrible person. You didn't greet me in the morning, so you're mean. I didn't greet you yesterday, but it's just because I had a bad day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's basically taking your own context into consideration, but not returning the favor to anyone else. Then ad hominem arguments or fallacies is something you mentioned earlier where the person starts to attack the character of the individual they're debating instead of the points that they are debating. So this is often actually also the case. It's similar to the halo effect where you kind of characterize the person instead of the argument. So say you are a convicted criminal, but you're making a solid debate for whatever movement, and someone says, oh, well, you're just a criminal, so what do you know?
Yeah.
Like, that has nothing to do with the
Oh,
argument
like
at
what?
all.
Yeah.
Or, start making personal attacks like the color of your tie or how your face looks.
Or when we went to that protest outside of Huntex and the one hunter just starts like ripping us off for tattoos.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like,
So obviously that means everything else we're saying is illogical
Yeah.
because we have tattoos.
yeah.
But that said, activists, please, animal rights activists, don't fat shame.
Yeah, please stop.
Jeez.
That was the most annoying thing, like people shouting fat slurs to hunters that would walk past.
Yes.
And
Like, yeah, keep eating your meat. Look at your like fat stomach or whatever.
Yeah.
Come on, stop it.
so it really harms. It's just harmful. Just
Exactly.
don't do that.
It's really, really problematic. There is more than enough logical shit to go in with an attack without talking about personal attacks.
Yeah.
Really.
And some vegans are fat as well, so
Exactly. So
Please
stop
stop.
with the fat shaming and the disease shaming and all that stuff. Or like any kind of character attacks.
yeah,
Like,
at all actually.
Oh
Just-
man,
just leave them
you
out.
heartless, carnous scumbags. Like that kind of shit I see on vegan debates often. Like, oh, you careless murderers, you this, you that.
Well, you see it actually like a lot with bringing up hunting again when people share hunting photos, and it's like different based on the gender of the hunter.
Yeah.
So like, oh, what a stupid bitch, you know?
Yeah.
Or like the guide will be something else, like, oh, you obviously have a small penis or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, come on. Like,
especially when they make direct attacks, like look at her face, look how she's doing this or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it happened with the minister of Belgium that made that thing about veganism, right? That quotes about veganism being unhealthy. And then everyone just attacked her appearance.
Yeah, because she's overweight, and they're like, oh, how can this obese person be saying stuff about health? And it's like, you could just like logically look at the science and the fact that a vegan diet is healthy without attacking her as a person.
Yeah, like attack her arguments, not her.
Exactly. Another really common one in debates about veganism is the appeal to nature fallacy. And this is basically the assumption that because something is natural, that it should be good. So, oh, but lions hunt buck, or you're going to tell them not to. It's natural. Circle of life, bro. Like all of that, just it's ridiculous.
These drugs are safe because they're natural.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know what else is natural? Bears are natural, and they aren't very safe to.
They'll rip your face off.
Or when people say like, oh, homosexuality isn't natural. And it's like, well, actually, there's like over 1,500 species where it's been recorded in, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also like a complete overlook of like, medicine is not natural. So, oh, you have a disease. Let it take its natural course, man.
Yeah, exactly. Or like the way we're eating is unnatural. We need to be eating like Paleolithic people, but also Paleolithic people didn't exist. And I drive a car.
Oh, man. Also, like lions kill their young occasionally. So that's natural. Should we do that?
Yeah.
No. Also, just because lions hunt buck doesn't mean that we are saying that that's totally nice and fine and moral. It's an excruciatingly horrible death a lot of the time.
But it's not like it's immoral.
No, it's not. But I'm not saying it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Like people seem to think that if you're advocating for veganism, you're saying that all killing is bad. And then they will say, yeah, but nature is good. Lions are good. This is a good thing to do. And I'm like, try being the buck. Yeah. It's not a rad story in that context either. So it's not helpful.
Should we also just take advantage of any weaker females and eat the children of the previous male?
Yeah, why not, hey? Also, you look at how many like natural compounds in nature are deadly poisonous. Berries, that's natural. Vaccines, not so much. But they save a lot of lives. So just saying.
Yeah, solid. Stop the appeal to nature fallacy. It's like the weakest thing.
Then appeal to tradition, even worse.
Even worse.
Just because something has been done for a long time or a belief has been long held doesn't mean it's good.
The Faroe Islands is a perfect example of this, of how these whales come in, is it once a year to breed or something? And then they capture them and just cut them up.
Because it's an indigenous cultural practice. But it's not really anymore.
And those people that do that are like not really indigenous people. I mean, they're like wealthy Europeans. They don't need to be doing it, but tradition.
Yeah, and we've been eating meat for like ages. So, it's normal. We should defend it.
Yeah.
Well, slavery went on for quite a while too.
Also, in Greek and Roman times, relationships with children were pretty normal.
Yeah. Should we resume that?
No. Terrence's face was saying no. Just because you can't hear that, I'm just saying
Thanks,
no.
Pete. So, yeah. Tradition, Trish mission. Next one, second last one, is false equivalence. So false equivalence is basically pointing out similarities that aren't really there, and the similarity that is perceived is based on a huge misunderstanding or oversimplification. So one that really irritates me is plants have feelings too.
Oh, God. So the false equivalence is saying like plants and animals are the same.
Yes. So when you say plants react to stimuli, therefore they are the same as animals who react to painful stimuli. Some plants react to the movements of the sun in a very simplistic way. They don't have a central nervous system. It's not the same as a suffering animal.
So they can't feel pain. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is not the same. There's not even any equivalence to make there, but people will point out the similarity to try and make an argument.
Do you think another example is maybe you mentioned earlier white privilege, and when someone could deny white privilege because their false equivalence is that they've had the same start in life as everyone else, ignoring historical and economic and geographic context.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Like, oh, but we went to the same school. We had the same opportunities. Like,
Yeah.
no, you didn't.
So yeah, I think that's a really dangerous false equivalence to have.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Then the last one that I just wanted to mention is the Nirvana Fallacy.
like thinking Nirvana was a good band. I'm joking.
I used to like them
Okay.
back in my grunge days. My grunge days.
Okay.
Don't tell me you didn't like Smells Like Teen Spirit, Pete. Okay. Pete's just cooler than everyone. Okay, Nirvana Fallacy. So this is when something is criticized because it's imperfect. So there's this idea that there's some like Nirvana ideal perfect endpoint, which is not likely. So one that really bugs me is when people say, oh, well, why are you trying to do vegan activism when the world's not going to go vegan overnight? You know, not everyone's going to go vegan. So because you don't have this perfect endpoint, we should just not try.
Yeah, exactly. I find, I don't know if it ties in the same way, but when you criticize capitalism, because it's so like, you know, overwhelmingly overbearing as a system that it becomes like air almost, like people can't think outside of it.
Yeah.
They're like, well, where's your solution? Your criticism is not relevant unless you have an alternative.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm exploring alternatives, but I don't have one right now. And I think you can acknowledge problems and still pursue that idea.
Yeah, it's like people can't really understand outside of what they're thinking. So they're just like, well, how are we going to make money if we don't have capitalism, Pete?
Yeah, and I think actually those people are having a Nirvana complex in a way by thinking, well, it's working, when actually it's not.
And if you don't have some like utopian solution immediately, then stop questioning it.
Where's your blueprint for how else to run a city?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
So how can you criticize capitalism if you don't have a working alternative this instant?
Yeah. And you often hear similar arguments like with veganism, going back to veganism again, where people will say, yeah, but animals are killed in crop production, so you also kill animals. So you say you're for animal rights, but your food habits also kill animals, and there's animal products in your tires and all of that. So it's like, okay, well, so veganism is not perfect, so I'm not going to listen to you. It's like, okay, well, how about we do less harm?
That is also a straw man argument, going back to your straw man point, actually, because they are thinking that vegans are saying we are perfect, and veganism has never claimed to be 100% cruelty free.
Yeah.
So they're exercising that straw man fallacy, right?
Yeah, but I think it applies more to the Nirvana fallacy because it's basically saying if your solution is not perfect, then it's not worth exploring. But yeah, I mean, it is also straw man arguments, like saying, oh, well, you think you don't harm animals. And it's like, well, no, I didn't say that.
Yeah, I said, well, I'm doing the thing that's going to cause the least harm.
Yeah.
And they saying, oh, you think you cause no harm while you do.
Yeah, that's why, you know, cruelty-free is a problem, like as a term, saying no animals were harmed in the making of this thing. Not necessarily true. So
yeah.
I think those are also things to just be careful of when you're advocating for veganism, to just realize that there are gray areas and these kind of fallacies are going to occur from both sides. So I think when we're doing any kind of debate or discussion or activism, we need to be aware of them from our own side, but also what fallacies are going to be thrown at us. And if our logic is more solid and watertight, it will be less likely that we have to deal with not only debating these topics, but dealing with the fallacies and making the people aware, like, you are engaging in a cognitive error right now, because that's a whole other debate and that just derails the discussion.
And that the same applies to any other social justice movements where you need to try to like get people to understand your perspective or be on your side or become an ally or something. Yeah,
so I guess if we can learn to communicate very clearly, concisely, and make sure that we are not engaging in these fallacies in the points that we make, it will be a lot harder for people to have faulty reasoning in their responses to us. Well, likely they'll just end up having some ad hominem thrown our way, you know, like, oh, well, you're an idiot because I don't like your face. And you're like, okay, well then, you win.
Well, it's worth being aware of it. So thanks for this great list, T. It's been super interesting chatting to you about it. And for anyone who's listening, if you have any other interesting topics that you would like us to discuss, or you have an idea that you know something about already, then send it through and we'll speak about it on the next episode and yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, our email address is mail@letsragetogether.co.za, and you can find all the links to our social media profiles and our Patreon and PayPal on letsragetogether.co.za.
Yeah, and let us know what you thought about this. If you think that the idea share is a good idea in itself, and you want to hear more episodes like this, as Pete said, we're super open to your ideas that we don't know anything about or that you want us to discuss, or even if you don't know anything about it either, but you want us to look into it, we'll do that. And also what you can do, if you do know about a topic that maybe is new to us and you want to get the idea out there to share with people, you can also send us a voice note. So you can record a voice note on your phone and you can email it to us, or on like Facebook or Instagram, you can send us a voice message, and we'd be stoked if it's a cool idea that we want to discuss to play it on the episode, so that we're not talking too much on behalf of you, but you can kind of share your idea. If you can send us like a 5-minute voice note and we can discuss that as well.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, and until next time,
Love and liberation.